So thanks so much for joining us and being here with us this evening to really share your story about how you came to this work. I think everyone's really eager to hear it. We're going to allow for some questions from the audience at the end. If there's one thing I've learned about Mark today, it's that he likes to engage. So if you have a question, please make sure that you jot it down, and some folks will be around to pick them up midway through. So you are a busy, internationally acclaimed actor, producer, director. You do a lot. And yet you also spend a lot of time really focused on watershed issues. How did you come to this work? You call yourself an accidental environmentalist. Tell us a little bit about what that means, what it means to you, and what really ignited this passion for you.
Okay. I grew up near Lake Michigan in the 70s, and it was a time when the lake was terribly polluted, and to the point where, as a boy, I would walk along the lake and I would see fish that had ulcers and cancerous tumors growing on them. There was trash and pollution scum along the water banks. And so I saw it firsthand, and it touched me really deeply. I also got to witness the cleanup of Lake Michigan. And I saw it also during my boyhood start to get healthy again. Saw the cancerous ulcers and tumors disappear from the fish. And so I saw both the horror and the solution right next to each other. And when there was a concerted effort, I actually saw that there was a way to address these issues, that we could make change happen. And I loved the water. You couldn't keep me away from it. Throughout my whole life, I've had a relationship to it, so I just love it. And I ended up in upstate New York with my family. I wanted my kids to have that same experience. To be able to run out the door and run into a creek or a pond or a swamp or a meadow or wetland and catch salamanders and frogs and fish and do all those things. And so we ended up in upstate New York, right at the smack dab at the height of this struggle that was going on for hydrofracking.
So there are a lot of people in the room tonight. Many of them are focused on water issues already. Some of them are really new to this issue. I mean, you could choose to use your voice, your platform on any number of issues. Why water?
Well, water is a tricky issue because in one sense we take it for granted. It's so abundant to us. We turn on the tap, it comes out. It's just so part of our lives. It's so part of our lives, it's literally like asking a fish about water. They have no idea what water is. It's just so prevalent. And so it's a tricky issue to get people turned on about it. It's also an issue that transcends all political and rhetorical and ideological boundaries. So I saw it immediately as a place to bring people together. People... They have a lot of different feelings about where we should get our energy and so on and so forth, but no one would say that it's worth contaminating our water. And I knew that was a way that we could have a conversation about it that could bring people together instead of divide people.
Yeah, so you've not only talked about the issue and had conversations with folks, but you've done some things yourself, and you started an organization called Water Defense. And that organization has really been about using data and engaging everyday people, everyday citizens to go out and test the water. Why was data collection and this notion of citizen science, which is really sort of crowdsourcing science, if you will, why was that so important to you?
Because I started to see that when we were fighting with water, what I started to see that it was very difficult to get a lot of data just as for the public. You had the EPA, you had the DEP, you had the polluters. They all controlled water testing for the most part, and they controlled what data we were getting, which sometimes I was seeing was actually corrosive to the dialogue we were having, because either we weren't getting a full picture of the data, or the data we were getting wasn't complete, or we came to find out 6 months later that the data had been tampered with, it had been withheld, or the testing methodology had been in some way compromised. And so I saw us being beaten by data, but I also saw arguments that were happening that didn't have to happen if we just simply had good quality data. Mm-hmm. If we had the right information, everyone could, the science tells us that it leads us to the right answer. And I just didn't feel like there was a lot of information out there.
So you mentioned a few different groups who collect data and who use it. And one of the things that we've seen happen in the Delaware River Watershed Initiative is we've seen citizen scientists, practitioners, rigorous academic scientists, all kind of coming together in new ways. And they each come at this question about data kind of with their own approach or their own perspective, but they're weaving it together in ways that that are really compelling. And I'm curious, you spend a lot of time all over the country. Have you seen efforts like that where people are weaving these various sources together?
So yes, what we're seeing now is this kind of people are leaving their silos, and they're not so how should I say it, snooty about that. It's there's a greater openness. And there's a place for citizen science along science. There's a place for citizen science along academia. There's a way where we can take all of this and start to get a broader picture of the world around us, mm-hmm. and it can be fun too. Kids going and if you give kids water tests and you send them out into the world, they'll come up with some imaginative places to get to that maybe the normal person wouldn't be able to get to, maybe a scientist wouldn't even be allowed to get to. And so I think the more we engage, the more buy-in you have from the community. And I think we made a mistake somewhere back there where we actually handed everything over to a few people. We handed it over to the federal government. We handed it over to the state government. We handed it over to the scientists. We just handed over our sort of lives in a strange way. And when we did that, we also became divorced from our relationship of the world around us. We lost our sort of investment in the world around us. It became more alien to us. And so I see a particular moment in time where we can start to regain that. And by engaging in getting out in the stream for a kid and a parent taking their kid to do water testing, or someone from the community decided to do water testing because they want to know what's in their water, that creates community, and community creates the necessary oversight to keep our environs clean and safe. Because who's going to fight more for it than us? Who's going to care more for the health of our world around us than us? Who's going to care more for our children than us? And the more we hand it over, and yes, we do need federal oversight, we do need these things, but we also need to engage ourselves, because no one will take better care of us than us. And then when we start to look at the world in a broader sense, and that web starts to grow throughout the world, then the world itself, we all becomes distributed. There's no one group that's supposed to carry the whole load. And this is the era we're living in. We're living in this new time of decentralization. And by that decentralization, we all carry a little bit of the burden. And so the burden's not too heavy for one individual or one organization. We're all working together as this giant ecosystem that works together in concord. And we don't even have to put that much effort into it, really.
Yeah.
That's what I see.
That's great. So you have through water defense, been traveling all over the country, and you've seen so many different kinds of crises. You know, I think only a handful of years ago, probably a lot of people would have said, well, why the focus on water? That's a problem of the developing world. That's not a problem that we face in the developed world. We have good systems. We have good water. But we are seeing crises all over the country now where water is really at the root. You've been traveling all over, so whether it's Flint, Michigan, California, Navajo Nation, each of these has kind of a different cause at its core. So whether it's you know, contamination from agricultural livestock or water scarcity, each one seems to have its different thing at the core. Are you seeing common threads among them?
Okay, so first of all, I want to thank a few people that are here tonight. I want to take this opportunity. My folks from Water Defense are here. Scott Smith, who has been to 63 different water contamination sites in the last 2 years. He is our chief investigator. He is the genius behind water contamination investigation events. And so he's the one. He's really been the one on the ground to all of these different places. I'm there by proxy through Scott. Judith Zelikoff is here. She's our toxicologist. She's a celebrated toxicologist, heads the NYU toxicology department. She's working with us in all of these different places. Ramsey Adams, of course, our executive producer, and Patricia and John Adams, who are kind of like my accidental environmentalist surrogate parents, and have been such an inspiration as a couple, as two people who have lived this beautiful life, doing this work and growing and passing it to their family and on to their community. So I want to thank them quickly. What we're seeing is the common thread that you're seeing is a kind of lack of, first of all, a lack of passion to get information to people. And I think what's happened is there's been a politicization of the EPA. There's been a politicization of the DEP. They're asked to do a lot. In what we call a captured agency is an agency that is like the DEP in our state, is, or the DEQ or DEC, whatever state, it's their environmental protection agency. They have to, they're mandated to actually do mineral management while at the same time protecting the environment. They're mandated to go out and bring in companies to do industrialization to things that harm the water, while at the same time they're meant to protect the water. So there becomes a conflict of interest. And that conflict of interest gets deeply polarizing and politicized. And so we have a body politic in our nation right now that's fighting against regulation and fighting against federal regulation, okay? So what you see happening is the EPA is kind of held at arm's length for state rights reasons. I get that. But the state also is trying to protect certain income streams. Or they're trying to keep from having to spend lots and lots and lots and lots and lots of money for remediation. And so what you see happening in Flint is the classic model of what's happening all over the United States. All of these contamination events have one thing in common, and what it is a unwillingness to be culpable, to keep the costs down of mitigation, to sort of move through the problem as quickly as possible without addressing the deeply fundamental issues that brought us to this problem. One of them is there is no real oversight. There's no one watching. When you get to a contamination site, what you end up having is a circular pointing of fault. And it goes around and around and around. Flint is the perfect example of it, okay? What you see happening in Flint is what's happening all over the United States, but we just don't know about it yet. We're hearing little inklings about it. The beautiful thing about water is it's the most beautiful solvent in the world. It breaks down every kind of pollution. It disperses it. It makes it impossible for us to understand, almost impossible for us to understand where the pollution comes from. It's a polluter's dream to be able to dump it in water. And that's worked for us for a long, long time. It's been a good way for us to dissolve pollution, to dissolve solids, to dissolve contamination, and distribute it so it doesn't concentrate anywhere. But those days are over now because we're running out of water. And so what we're seeing is that as water becomes more contaminated, it becomes more expensive. So then you have the privatization of water happening. And so it could seem very cynical what we're seeing happening with our water. There's a big, the United States happens to be one of the only countries, modern industrial countries in the world, who refuses to say that water is a right for all human beings.
So as we look at the news stories, we look at what's happening on the ground, and there are great moments of despair. What signs of hope do you see? What are you seeing as people begin to get more data, as people get more information, as groups like the ones that are in this room here today come together? Are there things that you can share with us about what you're seeing that give us some signs of optimism?
Okay, so that was pretty scary what I just laid out. I'm sorry. I don't want anyone to go home with nightmares. The fact of the matter is there is a lot happening, and people are waking up. Yes, what we're seeing is very disturbing, but at the same time, we understand, we know what's happening, and we have to know what's happening before we could do anything to change it. And so what's happening in Flint is we're being forced, and the EPA is being forced, and the Michigan DEQ or DEP is being forced to actually deal and address the problem, and deal with the problem and address it, and understand what it actually costs to not deal with it sooner. Okay? So yes, it's this horrible thing, but it's just like all of us. We're all kicking around in our lives, we're doing our things, and then all of a sudden you get a brain tumor, right? You get something happen to you, and all of a sudden you stop and you go, whoa, I'm going to die one day. Or the way I'm treating myself right now is going to have a negative or positive effect about how I move forward in the world. And it's those moments where we become enlightened, where we learn, where we begin to become aware.